Idag så ska vi träffa en amerikansk sociologiprofessor som vet mycket om minoriteter och vet mycket om emigration. Och den intervjun kommer författaren och journalisten Göran Rosenberg att göra. Göran, varför är Nathan Glazer en intressant person och vad har han att säga när det gäller de här sakerna?
Han är en av de riktiga veteranerna kan man säga, den amerikanska samhällsvetenskapen, sociologin. Han skrev i början på 50-talet, var med och skrev en mycket berömd bok som heter Den ensamma, The Lonely Crowd. Och sen har han i 20, 30, 40, 50 år följt det amerikanska samhällets utveckling från drömmen om total integration, lösningen av rasproblemet, minoritetsfrågorna så att säga försvinnande och successivt tvingats konstatera att de här frågorna löser sig inte så lätt. Att också det amerikanska samhället fortfarande brottas inte bara med afroamerikanska problemet utan också med andra kulturella, religiösa, etniska minoriteter.
Men han anser också att det är stora skillnader mellan USA och Europa när det gäller minoriteter och sådant.
Ja, i grova drag anser han att Europa har ett mycket, mycket större problem att lösa för att de europeiska samhällena kommer från mer homogen bakgrund där människor fortfarande har en stark nationell etnisk identitet och medan det amerikanska samhället nästan var grundat på att man skulle lämna det bakom sig och bygga någonting nytt. Det är det ena. Det andra är att det europeiska samhället i mycket större utsträckning än det amerikanska har en stor muslimsk invandring och det anser han vara ett större problem.
Okej, låt oss gå till intervju med Nathan Glazer.
Yes. Welcome to Global Access. It's an honor to have you here. You're almost, I would say, synonymous with American sociology. You have been along from the early 50s when the famous book The Lonely Crowd was written, and then you wrote another famous book that was called Beyond the Melting Pot.
Yes.
And then last but not least, a book that is called We Are All Multiculturalists Now.
Yes.
What is the development in the U.S. society that you have been witnessing during these decades?
The central aspect of American society that I've been writing on, watching, pondering, is really how the United States deals with ethnic and racial difference. It is well known as a country open to immigration. I mean, not open all that wide, but still a major attraction for people seeking to change their lives or to make more money or even on many occasions to escape from difficult political situations, religious situations. Still takes in, I suppose, a couple of 100,000 refugees a year. And it's true, when I started working as a sociologist, we were in a stage in which there was not great immigration. There had been a legal restriction since the mid-20s, but it was still a country
it was during the years of depression and the
very
war.
Few.
Yes.
During the war years, very few. And I suppose when I began writing, one of the central issues at the time was the situation of American blacks, which rose to a crisis situation. A crisis initiated quite properly by black leaders who had for years been waiting for the equality promised by after the Civil War, and which had been, at least in the South and in good measure in the North too, denied them a political equality, a social equality, an economic equality. And these revolutionary developments occurred with important legislation in the 60s, with beginning before that with important Supreme Court decisions in the 50s and so on. So I have been writing on all these years, and it's now 50 years or so, on the racial situation, the ethnic situation, the immigrant situation, etc.
But you expected at some point that this problem would be resolved. I mean, there was the remnant of slavery, the African-American dilemma, and that somehow would be the last step in the melting pot process. Wasn't that what you really hoped for?
That was my expectation. I think it was the expectation of many. After all, we did have these basic constitutional provisions from the late 1860s. We did have this very important and effective powerful legislation of the mid-60s, a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Rights Act. We had very sympathetic administrations in power, the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, even on most of these issues, the Nixon administration.
So it was good reason to expect that, but it didn't happen.
Well, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And which is not to say that things, that very important things did happen, but the notion that the basic problem of the inequality of blacks, economically, primarily, would be overcome rapidly. It turned out that was not the case.
The mindset that was sort of the key to success in America, wasn't it that you had the expectations of leaving sort of your past behind and succeed on your own? Opportunity was sort of what people sought, who came to America, who lived in America, and that wasn't...
You've described the situation correctly. In many ways, compared to Europe, the government did very little for you in the United States. It's a long tradition.
Right.
Actually, it does more than many Europeans think. We do have, again, in the same period in the 60s, we developed at least medical insurance or a program for those over 65. We expanded our welfare system. We did more things. But still, that kind of full paternalistic governmental involvement in... and
that wasn't expected. That wasn't expected by people. They wanted
They didn't expect it. They're supposed to go on their own. And of course, certainly that changed. Many programs were developed during that period, and even that was difficult. We discovered that changing a situation of very long standing was an extremely difficult thing. Then we had conflicts over it because one of the expectations of the Civil Rights Act, and it was perhaps naive, was that all those laws dealing with race, and there were many laws, requiring separation of races, laws prohibiting intermarriage between races.
That was laws that were
all
on,
these
that were
laws
on the books.
were abolished.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, the situation of an educational backwardness, of economic backwardness, of high residential segregation did not change. And even over a period of, now we're talking of 40 years since the major civil rights legislation, I would say the residential segregation of blacks is still remarkably marked, much more so than for recent immigrants, for example.
But you thought it justified at that point that there should be some preferential arrangement for the black Americans?
As a matter of fact, I did not, because I wrote another book in 1975 called Affirmative Discrimination, in which I criticized the development of what we called affirmative action programs, preference programs which are now talked about in Europe for minorities and so on. And these programs developed almost accidentally, not through legislation, but through dealing with certain specific problems, like the continuation of discrimination by the trade unions in building. And a number of almost ad hoc arrangements were created, which became bigger and bigger, which required some kind of preference, required counting.
But the thing is that you consider the black African-American situation as specific. It was sort of something out of the normal.
It was exceptional. It was exceptional, and of course of an exceptional history. I mean, people discuss why it was exceptional, and of course you have very disapproved of biological genetic theories, I think don't make sense. But the heritage of slavery, and then 100 years of segregation and discrimination after slavery, which is not to say that discrimination has disappeared, it left a heritage, a very complex heritage. So, for example, one of the best off groups among immigrants in the United States are African immigrants, black African immigrants. They tend to come with a lot of education. A lot of them get employment in colleges and universities and so on. And on the whole, they are better off than Native American blacks.
Behave totally different.
And they have a very different attitude. And I think it's a history has created an attitudinal situation.